Hello, welcome, welcome. We're so glad that you're here today. I am Kylee Heap. I serve as the Executive Director of Support After Abortion, and we are just so glad to have you in our meeting today. So, without further ado, we are talking about connecting across differences, tips for client support. Today, we are so excited to welcome back Monica Snyder, the Executive Director of Secular Pro-Life, to lead our conversation on connecting with and supporting clients who are different from ourselves so that they feel seen and valued and empowered. Monica has been working with Secular Pro-Life since its founding in 2009. She has a bachelor's in chemical biology and a master's in forensic science. She has been sharing this message with diverse audiences from churches and pregnancy resource centers to atheists and agnostics and everyone in between. So let's begin our time together. And thank you so much for being here, Monica.
Thank you for having me. I am happy to be here. As she said, my name is Monica Snyder, and I am the executive director of Secular Pro-Life. I am an atheist, and I am going to talk about meeting people from different backgrounds, but the presentation will focus largely on people who, for a variety of reasons, may not feel prepared necessarily for a religious healing program yet or at this time. I do have a bunch of disclaimers I want to give before I get started. The first thing is I am not a licensed mental health professional, and I'm also not the spokesperson for all atheists, much less all non-religious people. I'm coming to you today just to talk to you about some of my own experiences, how I see life and how things have gone for me, as well as people I know who've told me about theirs. But I'm not pretending that that will represent everybody. I also think it's important to clarify that non-religious is a really broad category. It can include atheists, yes, and agnostics. It can also include people who say they're spiritual but not religious, or they might even hold to a particular faith tradition or believe, for example, that Jesus Christ is their Lord and they just don't call themselves religious. So non-religious is really broad and it can mean a lot of things. And I just want to clarify that to say that when I talk to you about secular perspectives, it has gradations. The other thing, a lot of the content I'm going to share with you is from my team and me interviewing other experts and asking them what they would want us to share with audiences like this. So I say it humbly. We are not the experts on everything, but we are combining our own direct experiences with expertise from others to try to give an overall picture. And the last disclaimer is that there's almost zero chance I'm going to get through this entire presentation today without crying at some point because I'm going to share personal stories with you from difficult things that have happened with me. And I just want you to know I'm fine and I'm not worried about it. I don't want you to worry about it if that happens. So those are all my disclaimers, and now I will get started. First, we want to talk about who I'm focusing on for this presentation. It is people who have had abortions in general, and specifically those who might not come from a particular faith tradition. I'm going to show a lot of screen caps in this presentation from an organization called Shout Your Abortion. If you're not familiar with them, they are a pro-abortion storytelling project, and their idea is to normalize abortion by having more and more people talk about what their experiences were like. Now, the phrase shout your abortion makes it sound like they're only showing stories of women who say they felt empowered or liberated, and they do have a lot of stories like that. But what's interesting about this organization is they are willing to publish all stories. Whatever the woman says, they will publish it because they think that we should normalize all experiences. And that means there are a lot of testimonials from this organization of women who are suffering after their abortions. And I use their testimonials to illustrate my points because this is coming from people who support abortion. So when I talk to people who are maybe moderately pro-choice, they don't have to be suspicious that I'm citing a quote unquote anti-choice source that's just trying to ban abortion. That's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about even people who support abortion, who have had abortions, who say they're pro-choice, still talking about the struggles they're having. And so you can trust that this is a real phenomenon. Anyway, so I'm going to show you some quotes from Shout Your Abortion just to illustrate what we're talking about here. This is a woman who says, I really miss my baby and did when I was pregnant, knowing what I was going to do. I like to talk about my baby, look at photos. I even got a candle printed with the scan I secretly took a photo of. I don't necessarily regret it, but I feel really sad. And I see a lot of this theme of not regret, but suffering, not regret, but trauma. And it's important for us to remember that the word regret is only one possible way people express things. And people could say they don't regret an abortion. And what does that look like? In her case, it looks like this. These were some of the comments under this post. I feel the exact way. I mourned heavily for the first 7 years. While I carry no regret, I did have to grieve the loss of my baby. Some days I don't know how I will carry on. I feel so alone. And I just say these to illustrate that these are women on an abortion storytelling website suffering. But we don't have to only look at anecdotes. There is some data related to this. This is a study that came out in 2023. They asked women who have had abortions to pick from 4 options about how they would describe their abortion experience. They could pick that their abortion was wanted and consistent with their values. They could pick that it was accepted. If not wanted, accepted. They could pick that it was unwanted, or they could pick that it was coerced. Those were the 4 options they were given. 33% said wanted. 43 said accepted but inconsistent with their values. 14% said unwanted, and 10% said coerced. Now, there are roughly 1 million abortions in the United States a year. It's actually a little higher than that now, but for math, we'll say 1 million. 24% of these women say that their abortions were unwanted or coerced. What's 24% of 1 million? It's 240,000 women a year saying their abortions were unwanted or coerced. So we have testimonials you can see on different storytelling websites putting color to this suffering, but we also know the numbers are quite large. And that's not even getting into what it means for something to be accepted but inconsistent with your values. Just leaving that aside. Hundreds of thousands of women every year saying they're getting abortions they don't want or feel coerced into. So the work is there. I am going to talk a little bit about the particular phenomenon of secular women, and by that I mean could be atheist, agnostic, non-religious, whatever, but they don't affiliate with a particular faith tradition, being more likely to fall into these groups. So of all American women in general, 21% aren't affiliated with religion. So roughly 1 out of 5 American women is non-religious, okay? But of the women seeking abortion, it's 38%. Now that means 2 things. It means a lot of women seeking abortion do associate with a faith tradition. We have to keep that in mind because we need to be able to meet all different kinds of people from all different kinds of paths. But it also means that non-religious women are more likely than the average woman to seek an abortion. And this is particular context because at Secular Pro-Life, we talk all the time about how you don't have to be pro-choice just because you're secular. You can be secular and pro-life. That's our whole thing. But it is true that if you are Christian, you're way more likely to be pro-life. And if you're secular, you're way more likely to be pro-choice. Or if you personally aren't pro-choice, you're way more likely to be surrounded by the people closest to you being pro-choice. And this is important to keep in mind because secular women getting abortions are more likely to have people in their lives who think of abortion in a certain way, which can be empowerment or necessary or not necessarily a tragedy. And they're more likely to be around people who are very concerned politically about protecting abortion. And that affects what the people they're close to are willing to hear from them about their abortion. So showing another example from Shout Your Abortion, this woman said, "I'm sorry that negativity isn't an immediately useful political tool. I'm sorry it's discomforting for some or that it doesn't fit into messages, campaigns, or slogans. But I want people to know some of us do feel grief and regret." And I illustrate this to say, in pro-life communities and pro-life social circles, she doesn't need to convince us of this. We fully expect people to feel grief and regret. And a woman who's going through a post-abortion situation who has pro-lifers in her life is more likely to have people in her life that are like, yeah, those emotions make sense. But a woman who's in pro-choice situations is more likely to have people who are confused by her response or who actively want her to stop talking about it because it's a political threat. So that adds another layer to this. And this is not one-to-one with secular, but secular women are more likely to be in pro-choice social circles. Now, if you don't already know, Support After Abortion has done their own research as they look into how to best support people. And they did a survey of Americans, how many of you have had abortions? And of the people who've had abortions, how many of them felt they needed support after their abortion? Okay. They found that 49% of the women seeking support after their abortion were atheist, agnostic, or non-religious. Interestingly, 82% of women who felt they needed support didn't want a religious approach to healing, at least at this time, which presumably includes all the non-religious women and also a lot of women who do associate with some kind of religion and still at this time didn't want a religious approach to healing. I'm not giving an opinion on whether that's a good or bad thing for them or whether they should or shouldn't do it. I'm just saying there's a huge need for being able to welcome people in, make them feel safe and connected who aren't ready to talk about religion. The survey also found, I thought this was a little stunning. You almost never get a 100% result on anything in any survey. 100% of the people who responded said they would not ask clergy for help after an abortion. I'm not saying they are right or wrong or that that makes sense or doesn't. I'm saying that's what they said. It's something to consider. Now, I want us to especially notice for this presentation the non-religious women. There are more and more of them as we go through this path. And what I mean by that is, as I said, about 1 in 5 American women is non-religious, but 38% of the women seeking abortion are non-religious. So if you're a non-religious woman, you're more likely to be someone seeking an abortion. And then, of everyone who gets an abortion, almost half of the ones who feel like they need support are non-religious. So the further we're going down this path, the more non-religious women are involved. Now, I don't know for sure why non-religious women would be more likely to say they feel they need support after abortion. But I have 2 theories as to why that might be the case. I'm just offering them for your consideration. And these are them. The first one is, it's not that secular women are more likely than Christian women to struggle after abortion. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's that women who are already part of a faith or church community are more likely to have already found some kind of support, such that if you ask them in a survey, do you feel you need support? They've already got it. That's my theory. Because forget abortion for a second, forget grief counseling even. Church communities, some church communities, are just very good at logistically and culturally and emotionally supporting their people. They're just very good at that. So I'm an atheist. My husband's an agnostic. We lived in Northern California for a very long time. We had our first 3 children there, and we had friends in the area, but no family. And there were lots of situations where we needed more community support that we didn't really have access to because we weren't near family. And my husband's parents, who are both Christians, their solution was often, you should join a church, which there are reasons why that's difficult for us. But for example, we need to move. We need help moving. Oh, our church helped us move. Oh, we just had a baby. We could use more assistance. Oh, our church did a meal train. Churches are very good at lots of different kinds of support. And my theory, I'm just guessing, is that if a woman gets an abortion and she's part of a church community and she feels comfortable seeking help, she knows where to go for help. She already knows where to go for help. She already knows that there are people and organizations and programs in place. If she has the courage and she feels comfortable, she knows where to go. Secular women, I think, are less likely to know where they can go for help if they feel they need help. There's just not that same built-in community for a lot of secular people in a lot of ways. So my first theory is that non-religious women are more likely to say, I feel like I need more help, because they're less likely to already know where to get it. That's my first theory. My second theory is kind of what I was talking about before. Non-religious women are more likely to be close to pro-choice people. Their loved ones are more likely to be pro-choice or at least ambivalent about abortion than to be pro-life. And that means that if they do speak up and say something about how they're having a hard time, I suspect they're more likely to have social circles who will push back and kind of want them to stop. They won't understand as much why this would be so traumatic. They will feel like it's a political threat to the narratives they need to protect abortion access. And so my theory is that non-religious women are more likely to find that it's an extra barrier to reaching out to people close to them to try to process this. Again, I'm just guessing, but when we see that of all the people who get abortions, non-religious women are more likely than religious women to say they really feel like they need support. And I think this might be why. Now, if they need help that badly, why don't they go ahead and use programming, if they know it exists in the first place, that has religious elements to it? Some of them will. Some of them will. If they find out there's a possibility out there for help, even if it's not identically exactly their worldview, they'll still go. And I want to be clear that there is plenty of programming that can be very helpful to them, even if they don't agree on some of the religious elements, and they will just do that. But a lot of them, that will feel like a barrier to entry. And I wanted to kind of tease out a little bit the different ways that can play out. I have found, I've been working in the pro-life movement, volunteering at least since 2009 and working formally for the last several years. And I tell people I'm an atheist because it's relevant to our work. We're advancing secular arguments against abortion and so on and so forth. So people know. And I work with Christians all the time. And I have found in my experience that usually if you tell someone you're secular, they sort of default without thinking about it, think you've always been secular. So that's one kind of person. You know, they were never raised with religion. They've just been secular the whole time and they don't understand it and they don't access it. And there are people like that. I think in the United States, a lot of atheists, agnostics, non-religious people used to be religious. And that's a totally different breed. So it could be that she just has never been religious and this doesn't make any sense to her. It could also be that she used to be religious and she left because she had a bad experience with religion. And by that, I mean with people within her church community or with something that happened at church or something that happened that the way she was raised, the beliefs she was raised with were very jarring to her. I know people who, when they deconverted and became atheists, it was a huge relief because they were really, really afraid they were going to burn in hell. And then when they no longer believed, that was like a relief. So for some people, there's this really bad affiliation with the religion or with the religious community, and that makes them really put off by a religious healing program. For other people, they used to be religious and they had a good experience. They had good experiences with religion and bad experiences with their loss of faith. I'm one of these people where I was raised Catholic. I liked being Catholic. I liked Catholicism. I get along well with the Catholics. My mom is Catholic now and we're close. And I lost faith for other reasons, story for a different day, and it was very painful and disappointing. And I sometimes have a hard time in circumstances and places and programs or whatever that are very religious because it it makes me very sad because I miss it and I can't get it back, and that makes it hard for me to engage in those spaces. Now there are people who they didn't have any bad experiences. They left for other reasons. Maybe they were never that into it in the first place. Maybe they were at one point and then they had other things happen in their life and it didn't make sense to them anymore, but they're not necessarily upset about it. And then lastly, there are people who aren't ready for religious programming who are religious and who do have faith, but the circumstances that led them to the abortion or the abortion itself is causing a crisis of faith for them right now. Now, any one of these groups could access religious programming and benefit from it depending on where they're at. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying for some of the people in each one of these groups, that will be a barrier to entry, at least at this time. They're not ready for that in this moment, and that might mean that they won't participate. I wanted to talk for a little bit about why there might be hurdles specifically with religious healing. And here I'm going to talk about I've never had an abortion, but I've had 2 miscarriages, which I grieved very much. And I grieved them as an atheist, which is its own kind of context. And I wanted to talk about, at least from my own experience, how that can be a hurdle when trying to process. So when I had my first miscarriage, which was the loss of my son's twin, not only was it horrifically sad, but it was also very confusing because I didn't know I was pregnant with twins until they told me I lost one of them. So it's very confusing to grieve so hard when if I hadn't gotten the ultrasound I gotten, I would have never even known that other child existed. And yet I'm heartbroken. What does that mean? It's very confusing. And I could tell that I needed more help beyond the people I'm close to. The people I'm close to are wonderful. And I grieve out loud. I talk about it very frankly, and people are very supportive. I have a really good community. But I was having a really hard time, and I could tell I was going to need more help in addition to the people I'm close to. And so I was trying to get connected to a grief counselor, whole other story. It was incredibly bureaucratic and difficult, and it took many months. And in between that time, I joined some online support communities because I wanted to talk about it more. And the first community I joined was not explicitly Christian. It's just that a lot of the women in the group were Christian. And they post a lot of things like this. And I don't begrudge anybody else if the thought of a bigger, better plan or the thought of an afterlife is helping you process, then you should lean into that. I'm glad that you feel that way. But I don't believe in either of those things. So for me, it actually just made it so much more painful because it sounds like saying the way through this is something you can't do. So good luck. I know nobody was doing that on purpose. I actually asked them in the group, I'm having kind of a hard time for these reasons. Do you guys know if there's any secular pregnancy loss groups? And they were very kind. They were like, oh yeah, here we recommend this one. And there was one for agnostics, atheists, women. And that group, they were secular, but they required you to be pro-choice to join the group. Very unusual to be a pro-life atheist. So while I'm mourning the death of my child, who I lost in pregnancy, I can either go with a group that is using healing processes that make it worse for me, or I can go with a group that requires me to say, it's fine if you did this on purpose, though. Those are my options. So I still joined the secular group because I was desperate. And people were very kind there, but it was very jarring. Ideas of the afterlife or providence and forgiveness get just they play out differently depending on where you're at. And if there's a program that requires you to believe some of those things, it's not just with abortion either. I've known a couple atheists who needed to go to AA, and they were in very desperate situations. They really needed help. And it was really hard for them because when AA talks about stuff to do with a higher power, that has no meaning for them. They don't know how to access that, and they feel like they can't do the program and that they're just screwed. So it can be tricky. Not everyone, I'll say again, I'm not the spokesperson for all atheists or all non-religious people. Some people will talk about belief in the fact that we don't know, there's so much we don't know about the universe and so much that are out of our control, and we can surrender control. Like, there's different ways you can do it, but it gets complicated. So given all these barriers, what can we do to try to meet people where they're at? I have a couple of thoughts. These apply to all people, not even just people who've gotten abortion, much less just secular people. These just apply to everybody. When you are having an interaction with someone where there's something you want out of that interaction, if that doesn't work out the way you want, it can be uncomfortable. So in the case of trying to help someone heal after abortion, what does success look like? Does it look like they get to a mentally healthy place? Does it look like they understand and acknowledge that abortion killed their child and they need to take agency and ownership of that in order to heal? Does it look like they start coming back to, or for the first time, to Christianity or another faith tradition? Does it look like they are really good friends with you and you're going to have this ongoing friendship? I'm not saying what success has to look like. It could be all of those things or none of those things and something else. I'm just saying, imagine what success looks like, and then imagine it's not working. You're talking to someone who is sure that this was the right decision and that abortion must remain legal no matter how they feel about it, or they're even bigoted against religion and they don't want to talk about it, or they don't really like you that much and don't necessarily want to see you again. Whatever it is, imagine what you're hoping will happen is just not happening, and that's uncomfortable. The question is, how do you absorb that discomfort in order to make space for them to process where they're at right now? I think it's really important to emphasize, and this goes to the next point, for most people, whether it's changing their mind about something or getting to a place of healing, any of those things, it takes a long time for most people. And so I think sometimes we feel really pressured in a single conversation to make a point. I say this to secular pro-life followers all the time, trying to convince pro-choice people to be pro-life. You feel like you have this one conversation, this one chance where you have to make the best arguments to convince them. It's actually the opposite of that. All you want to do is be patient and show them you care about them and you can talk about this difficult thing. And it's the same thing here. That's where humanizing the other comes in. You want her to know you care about her well-being, regardless of if she agrees with you or not on whatever. You still want her to be well. If she has boundaries, like if she doesn't want to talk about certain things, if she doesn't want to talk about religion or her ex-boyfriend or stuff, you can just respect that, let her lead the conversation, and be patient. None of this is to say you'll never get to talk about these things or get to this point. It's more that it can take a while, especially with people who are dealing with trauma. It can take, we're thinking more on months than days, even longer for some people. Sometimes it's years and years. And so the point isn't to get certain points across in a certain conversation. The point is to establish a relationship where you can keep talking about these things and they can have space to think and work out where they're coming from. And the other thing you can do is involve community. Whatever group you're coming from, I would be very impressed if you were able to provide everything for every need someone has. Even if we're just talking about healing, some people want to be in a group, some people want to be one-on-one, some people want to be in person, some want to be anonymous online, some people want a secular thing, some people want a religious thing. Like there's a lot of things. To the extent that you can help them, great. But it's not your fault if you can't help them with everything. The question is just, if they need something you can't offer, do you know somebody who can? Do you have referrals ready for stuff that they need? Do you have resources in mind either within your community or online where you're like, so instead of when they need something, instead of saying, oh, we can't do that, sorry, it's, well, not us, but I can help you connect to this or that group. It's a very different response. So these are all ways that you can build connection with basically anybody, not specific, again, to secular women or post-abortive women or anything, but it would apply to them too. Now, I do have more specific ideas for post-abortion healing, and I want to emphasize again, I say this humbly, I did a very long interview with Laura Aguilar from the Center for Reproductive Loss. She is a Christian, and her organization works with all kinds of people. And she told me these are the common themes that they generally try to hit just with all kinds of people. Very flexible, very helpful. And that is to acknowledge their experience, acknowledge that whatever they're feeling is normal, encourage them to tell their story, help them get to know their grieving selves, and explore rituals. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each one of these. So, first, it's acknowledging their experience. This is true for anyone who's going through a hard time, but I want to emphasize again that for secular women who are more likely to be in pro-choice social circles, this can be a particular thing. So again, from Shout Your Abortion, this woman says, I struggle with opening up about my feelings to my loved ones because they are so insensitive and think it was a good decision because it wasn't under ideal circumstances. The pregnancy wasn't ideal. So these are people she loves who love her. And they presumably want her to be well, but they don't get it. And they don't understand when she talks about it being difficult because they think the abortion was obviously the right decision. And she has to struggle with that. This one, I felt embarrassed and guilty about what a disaster I was, like my feminist pro-choice honor badge was going to be revoked for my severe overreaction to something I had been taught was no big deal. So again, this is something that women in some social circles are taught this is a big deal, and they go through it and they're like, yep, it is a big deal. And their social circles are like, yep, that was a big deal. And they don't have to deal with that disconnect. But women in more pro-choice social circles are more likely to have this, like, I don't get why you're having such a hard time. What is the problem? And then there's this gaslighting effect. This next one really kind of broke my heart. It's a comment I found on Reddit, on the abortion subreddit, which I do not recommend that you go to. But a woman on the subreddit was talking about how she just had an abortion and it was so much worse than she thought. We're seeing this with the rise of abortion pills, that women go home and they see an embryo or something they didn't expect, they weren't prepared for, and they're reeling. And she posted in the abortion subreddit that she was having such a hard time, and then, she thought it looked like a baby and she can't believe she's done this, that kind of thing. And this comment I'm going to show you is a woman trying to help her. And it's a woman who's had an abortion, and she says, I'm not sure how far along you were, but I'm assuming first trimester. So as you say, there's no baby yet, just an embryo in early development. And then she says, but as someone who's had an abortion, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like a baby. I wish I could have removed emotion from this situation. That would have been ideal. And this really struck me because, first of all, this woman is saying in her own situation, her instincts told her she lost a baby. And she's struggling to make sense of that because that's not what other sources are telling her. And because there's a lot of emotional reasons to not believe that now that you've had an abortion. And the thing that makes this so bittersweet is she's taking all of that, and in order to try to help another woman is also telling her it's not a baby, it's not a baby. That's what she thinks will help. And so this is the social circles they are running in when they're casting about desperately for help and getting, it's not a baby, it's okay that you thought that, but that's incorrect, and it's not a big deal, And we know that for most people, that's not going to really help them process. So acknowledging just, yeah, this is what happened is a starting point for people to be able to start to understand what they're going through. Then you want to talk about feelings are normal. Now, I want to emphasize that whether it's abortion or miscarriage or any other grief, we fully expect people to feel all of the negative emotions, but the reality is that people's emotions are complex. When I lost my first, I was very confused. Like I said, I hadn't known that that child had existed until she was already gone. And in addition to grief, I was getting in my head too much about, does it make sense for me to feel this way? Does it make sense for me to feel this way when I didn't even know this embryo was here? Does it make sense to feel this way about embryos at all? Like questioning even my whole pro-life positioning, because it sure would be easier for me right now. If I had thought it was just a clump of cells, I think I'd feel better, Does it make sense as an atheist to care so much about when you don't even believe in souls? Like, why do you even care? There's all these things. So I'm having all these questions, internal monologue about, is my grief justifiable? And my younger sister, also an atheist, was so helpful to me. And she was like, will you stop? Your feelings are your feelings. There's no correct or incorrect feelings. That's not a thing. The feelings that happen are what is happening. And you've got enough to deal with processing the feelings that are happening in the situation that is happening without having this extra layer of unnecessary complications and uncertainty, wondering if you are having the correct feelings. Your feelings are your feelings. And you should just give yourself permission to feel them. And she helped me so much because I did. You're right. Different people grieve different way. Different people feel different things. You could have a wanted pregnancy that you're nervous about and have a miscarriage, and part of you feels a little bit of relief. And then you feel shame and guilt because you're not supposed to feel. There's no supposed to. You feel what you feel. Your feelings are just signs pointing to what you're going through and what you think. You're using them as clues onto how to go through this journey. You don't need to worry about if they're the right clues. They exist. And so I picked this poem about a woman's miscarriage, where she talks about so many different things: joy and tranquility and tempest and brokenness, sadness, hopefulness, feeling hopeful at the end. Lots of, like, it's a roller coaster. And telling them whatever you feel, those are just your feelings, can be very liberating, especially for people where other sources are telling them it's no big deal. Why would you grieve a clump of cells, etc.? And you could say, you feel however you feel. And the pro-life side can do this too. If you have someone who they feel like they're supposed to be deeply grieved and maybe they're not, you feel how you feel. That is what is happening, and you should just accept that and then process it as needed. The next thing you do is encourage storytelling. I want to say very clearly, really quick, I don't necessarily mean grabbing a sign and going to a march. And I definitely don't necessarily mean writing a testimonial and posting it publicly. Some people, that is helpful to them in certain circumstances. I have a whole separate presentation about assessing if you're ready to do that. Here, I just mean whether it's to a trusted friend, in a group work, to a therapist, or just like you writing in a journal. The point is to externalize and start to verbally explain what happened. And that helps us start to make sense, untangle the mess that's in our heads and in our hearts. You just, what happened? What are the circumstances that led to this? Why did they happen? Tell me more. Tell me more. Well, how did you get here? You know, and that can help people start to understand for themselves what happened by trying to explain it to someone else, even if the someone else is a leather-bound book that they're writing in. It can help people get a better idea. This was the interesting part Laura was telling me about that I haven't heard of this before. She said, you want them to get to know their grieving self. We all manage feelings different ways. A lot of times it's going to come back to how feelings were managed in our household when we were kids, what we learned about how to manage feelings then. She referenced a book, Grief Recovery Handbook by John James and Russell Friedman. I have not read it. She said that in it they have what's called the loss history graph. You can go to Google image search and see examples of this, but all it is you make a timeline of your life and you think about times when you've lost something. It could be a death of any kind. It could also be like the end of a relationship, or you had to move out of your family home, just things like that. And then think about not only how you felt at the time, but how did you react? What did you do? What are the behaviors that you default to that you may have not even noticed about how you process grief? It's good to be aware of those. Some of them are helpful, some of them are not. Some people, they have a drink. Some people, they reach out to a friend. It could be a variety of things, but just kind of getting an idea of like, how do you grieve? Have you noticed how you grieve? What can we expect in this also grief situation? So I have two more quotes from Shout Your Abortion. One of them says, I think it's important for some of us, maybe most of us, for me, definitely, to grieve, to feel real grief, to allow real grief. Like you lost someone real, because this baby was real to me. And this one said, my due date was February 26th, and I got a tattoo of the birthstone and flower to honor my little one that I could not have here on this earth. Again, she says, I have no regrets, but I do grieve. And my point here is just they have to give themselves space for that and think about how they are doing that. Consciously think about, how do you grieve and what does that look like for you and what does that mean for processing? And then the last thing she said is to let them explore rituals. And I can attest to this personally. When I lost my first child, I was shocked at how much I felt like I really needed to do something, not just feel things, not just think things, not just talk about things. I needed to do something. And this was very hard for me. I'm an ex-Catholic. Catholics have lots of rituals, and rituals help people make sense of things. Rituals help people signify that something's important. And I think I found it comforting in Catholicism to have rituals for different events and different important life events and different things. And then you leave that, and now you don't have those anymore. And it's very difficult, in my opinion. And now I have this traumatic situation that I'm very sad about. I have lots of big feelings that I don't know what to do with. And what's my ritual going to be? I didn't have any remains because it's a lost twin, so my body just reabsorbs the remains. And people are like, well, you could make a memory box. Memories of what? I have one ultrasound photo. I can't pray. I just feel like I'm stuck. And I wanted rituals so bad, and I didn't know what to do. And so I listed here rituals people can do regardless of your religious background. You know, there's processing rituals, there's memory making rituals. Some people really feel the need for atonement rituals. Now, this is going to be different for everyone. I'm not saying make this a checklist and have a woman go through each one. I'm saying these are ideas. Some people, whether it's abortion or other things in their life, they do things that later on they feel terrible about. They feel like they don't know how they'll ever move on and feel like they could be a decent person again. And for some of them, atonement rituals help. You take the horrible thing that you did that you're trying to be better from, and you go find other people in related situations, or not really, it doesn't have to be related, but find people and help them too. Take all the suffering and learning you did and try to make it worth something more. So a lot of people will volunteer or donate or mentor or just try to help other people that are their past selves or similarly related. And those can be very comforting rituals for them. There are letting go rituals. A lot of times these are, you do a processing ritual combined with a letting go ritual. I don't personally find these very useful, but other people do. So I included them. Letting go of a balloon, blowing out a candle, tossing a stone in water, burning a piece of paper. Just something, an action you can do to try to take everything you're feeling and thinking and channel it, right? I put this one on here. This woman had an abortion, goes into a deep depression. People thought she should get over it. She had nowhere to put all of this. And so she knew instinctively she needed a ritual. So she gets a small wooden box. She bought baby stuff and she had a campfire and had a makeshift funeral because she's trying to find a way to do something to get all of this stuff out of her. I didn't put it on here, but these are all rituals for the person who's suffering to go to try. But you could also have rituals for the people around them to help them. And ritual I'm using very broadly. It basically just means actions to show this is significant. So when I had my first loss, one of the pro-life groups that Secular Pro-Life works with a lot, their staff got together and all signed a card and sent me a candle with the name. And it meant so much to me because it was an action they took to say, this is important. We're going to do something to show that this is important. My grad school girlfriends, none of whom were still in the same state as me anymore. They couldn't just come over and hug me. They pulled together and got me gift certificates for meals so that I didn't have to think about how to make dinner for my older kids while I'm doing this. That's a ritual. Like meal trains at churches, that's a ritual. That's a ritual, a thing you can do to help the people around you. And I think any action you can take beyond talking to people is also very important and helpful, but also actions you could take to show I'm going to go through an action, a process. I'm going to spend money or time or effort to show that this is important can be a ritual. And I think for a lot of people that could be very helpful. Now, the last slide I have is basically a giant question mark. I just wanted to mention that in particular, navigating forgiveness, I think it's complicated for all people, everybody, but I think it can have a special version of complication if you don't believe in God and ultimate forgiveness. Secular people can still forgive one another and forgive themselves for things, but sometimes, especially for people who used to be religious and aren't anymore, and they used to know that divine forgiveness concept and they don't have it anymore, that leaves a hole. And it can be complicated for them to try to figure out how to, if you feel like you need forgiveness, and who are you going to get it from? Some people feel like they really want the child to forgive them. If they believe in an afterlife or other things like that, that can be helpful. I was just reading a testimony from one woman who said that she felt like she started to heal when she prayed to her children to forgive her and felt very certain that they had affirmed their forgiveness of her. I don't begrudge her that. But for people who don't believe in an afterlife, that's not an option. It's not a thing. And so I wish I could tell you, therefore, you should do this or that. I'm sorry to say that I can't. It does take different flavors for different people. When I interviewed Laura Aguilar, she was talking about how some people who don't specifically believe in like God or a deity, again, non-religious can mean a lot of things. They could feel like they seek forgiveness from their ancestors or from nature or from the universe, and different people feel different ways about that. So there's options here, but it is just a little bit more nebulous, I think, and a little bit less direct than if you believe in a divine creator who loves you and who can forgive you. That's, I think, in some ways, much more straightforward. Now, I will say, some people in this position, this is their step into Christianity. I know that. There are some people coming back to Christianity or becoming Christian or another faith tradition in part as they seek to make sense of everything and heal from it. And that's fine. I think that people need to do what makes sense for them. I'm just letting you know that for some people, that's not possible, at least at this time. I think it's really important. I had a close friend of mine who's Christian who I practiced this presentation for yesterday, and she said that I need to remember to say this, so I'm going to say it right now at the end. I think it's really important to understand that a lot of people who are non-believers they don't see it as a choice not to believe. They don't see it as, well, I could believe that, but I choose not to. It's just not accessible to them. I've used analogies before where it's like if someone tells me, hey, if you decide to believe that the sky is purple, then you'll get to see your miscarried children in heaven someday. That's great. The sky isn't purple. I wish that I believed that. Tell me how to believe that, right? And people will try to say things that just don't make sense to us. And we go out there and we look really hard and the sky is still blue. I would love to believe that, but I don't know what you're saying. And I believe that you believe that. I'm not mad at you. I'm just saying I don't know how to do that and it's not working. And I want to emphasize that for some people, this isn't just I don't want God telling me what to do, so I want to live my life. It's not just, I've never thought about this before. It's something else. It's more than that. And so it's just not always going to be an option for them to step into what they do fully think might be helpful. They just can't access it. Just to keep in mind that that's where some people are coming from. So to recap, hopefully I'm still on time here. Why do we care about helping these people? Well, because we want to prevent future abortions and we want to prevent trauma and we want people to be well. They're disproportionately unaffiliated with religion. Although I will say again, a lot of people who get abortions and a lot of people who need help are religious and they would prefer religious and spiritual healing. So we're definitely not saying don't have that. You should definitely have that. We're saying have multiple tools in the toolbox. How do we meet them where they are? We try to absorb discomfort in interpersonal interactions, humanize them, and involve community and other resources to the extent that we can. And what might healing look like? Acknowledging their experience, acknowledging that their feelings are normal, encouraging them to process and tell their story, encouraging them to consider how they grieve, and exploring rituals that might help them process. Okay, that is everything I had for you today.
That's fantastic. Thank you so very much, Monica. I want to begin by what so many of the people in our room are sharing, and that is thank you for sharing your grief with us. And you did it so vulnerably, and that is something that I will always treasure. We do have a couple of people that are asking questions, in particular, asking about that grief recovery book. The Grief Recovery Handbook is a very helpful resource. Monica, you shared that you have not read it, but Jane Abate has read it. And I wonder, Jane, if you wouldn't mind coming on for just a moment to very, very briefly share your experience with that.
Yeah, I appreciated that there are some very specific, I call them exercises or activities that you can apply and use to help people connect with their grief and work through it. And they're, I think, really practical. I really like that. And so I'll go back to it from time to time for my videos.
Thank you very much, Jane. Appreciate it. Another question, Monica, if you're willing to answer this one. In your view, what makes a support space feel safe for secular people?
So basically, just being able to give signals that you are aware that they have a different view than you and you are totally cool with that and it's fine. In an actual physical space, like if you're going to a room where there's going to be a group session or something, it is helpful to think about who your target audience is and then walk through that space trying to look at it from their eyes. So if you are thinking about secular people going to a space and it has a lot of religious iconography or indications or things, that might put them off. And it could be for different reasons. For some of them, it could be they don't like it, but for some of them, it could be they don't have a problem with it, but they're afraid you won't like them. And those are different things. So as a secular person, I feel more comfortable in spaces that are not overtly religious. Although I will also say, if they know before they get there that it is a religious space, that's fine. It's like, it's not a bait and switch. You know what I mean? Like, forgetting recovery programs for a minute, I do tons of pro-life work. If I am going to a pro-life conference that's being held in a church, I don't expect them to refrain from referencing religion. I am choosing to go to a church. That's my choice. But if I go to a pro-life conference that's being held in a town hall and it's marketed as just a pro-life conference and then it's very, very religious, I feel really thrown off. Like I didn't expect it. So it's just setting expectations, being really upfront. You can say things like, for example, if you have a recovery program and a major component of it has to do with spiritual or religious stuff, it's not necessarily that you have to cut all that out, but you could say up front, this is our recovery program and these are the steps we go through. How do you feel about that? Do these parts work for you? I want to make sure that we're on the same page about what we're doing. And that's just being upfront. It just builds trust. You know, it's all about being upfront, showing them you're cool with who they are, you're aware of differences and you're fine with it, and checking in with them and making sure that they are comfortable with what's going on. It's tricky with people who are very, very emotionally vulnerable because they may not be direct about what they think or feel because they're afraid that if you don't like what they have to say, you won't help them. And so it is a little tricky. It's not like just everyday conversations with people. You have to kind of go out of your way to say, listen, we know that this works for some people and not others, and it's okay. I want to know where you're coming from. How do you feel about this? Where does faith play into this for you? Or does it? Just really open-ended questions and then really welcoming and reassuring and not pushing a particular view on them, just asking them what their view is and reflecting that you're listening. I have a lot of very close friends who are Christians, other religions too, but in this case, mostly Christians. And the way that they handle our differences makes a huge difference in our closeness. I've had people come up to me at pro-life events who I don't know, who they're not mean or rude or anything, but they come up to me and they say, hey, can I offer you a Bible or can I talk to you about this? And like, it's kind, but it's totally misplaced. They don't know I already own a Bible. They don't know anything about me. And they weren't trying to find out either. Whereas I have friends who I have talked with about faith and lack of faith for over 10 years. We talk about it all the time, totally comfortable, because I know that they love me even if I disagree with them, and I feel comfortable and safe letting them know I disagree with them. And the reverse is also true. So it really depends on, I'll say again, thinking about it from their eyes, being really upfront with them of where you're coming from and what you think and what you have to say, and then letting them know that if they don't feel the same way, that's okay. I know we might not agree, and that's totally fine. How can I help you either way? And open-ended questions and a lot of listening makes people feel very heard. I have one friend, I talk way more than I listen, so I'm kind of a hypocrite here, but I have one friend who does this thing that I just think is so sweet, where we'll be in the middle of talking and I'll say something and he'll stop what he's doing, he'll lean forward and he'll say, tell me more about that. That's so interesting. And I feel so important when he does that. So just like that active, like, I'm interested in where you're coming from kind of thing.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Monica. I reflect on our relationship over these years, and you have been the person that has colored in a lot of what my thoughts are when we're approaching and caring for people who have different belief systems than I do. I think so many people have found today's conversation valuable. I wanted to particularly highlight Christine. She shared in the chat, I appreciate this discussion and find it refreshing as a clinical therapist working with women from all walks of life. I have volunteered with faith-based groups, yet I saw a need and started our metro area's first clinical secular abortion recovery group for the reasons that you are speaking to. Thank you.
That's fantastic. I want to say too, when Secular Pro-Life and Support After Abortion first connected, I was overjoyed because Secular Pro-Life has had people reach out to us repeatedly for years. Usually it's someone who's close to the woman, not the woman herself. But we have people reach out to say, how can I help a woman who isn't Christian who's struggling after abortion? And we are a very small staffed group. We don't have the capacity to offer healing programs nor the expertise. And for a long time, it was so frustrating because we had very little to tell them. We would refer them to a couple different social media accounts where women who've had abortions who were atheists talk about it. And then we eventually wrote a blog post saying, here's how you can look for a therapist that might be appropriate for you. But we know that's so limited. How many people can even afford a therapist? And then we found Support After Abortion, who is actively trying to develop secular-based resources. And I was so relieved. That I scheduled a post every Sunday for all of 2024 that highlighted someone suffering after abortion and said, if you're struggling, go to Support After Abortion, because I could refer to them. I'm aware of groups that help with post-abortion healing that are Christian-based, and if a Christian came to me and asked, I would refer to them. But now I have something I can offer them. So you saying you're setting up a clinic for that, music to my ears. There's so many people that really need help and they just don't have any idea that that's even an option, much less an option that would fit for them. So big deal. I appreciate that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. And at Support After Abortion, one of the things that just keeps coming to mind is checking your bias and remaining curious. And that has been something that has really helped me personally as an active practicing Catholic. Monica has helped to be the sounding board. When I think I'm speaking in a secular way, when I think I'm using words that would resonate across many different pools of thought, sometimes I just call or message Monica and say, does this actually sound as good as I think it's going to sound? And sometimes she says, no, no. And
Usually I say yes.
yeah, but I appreciate the no, because sometimes when I think I'm stretching myself to be accessible to different belief systems, I'm really not. And it's not because my heart isn't there. It's because I don't have the language. I haven't walked in those shoes. And I really highly recommend that all of you reach out to your networks and build those boards of advisors to you yourself to help you reach the people you're trying to serve, whatever it is that they believe in. We have reached our time limit for we're going to have our next abortion healing provider webinar. You might see from the title that we are just really passionate about what we've been talking about today with Monica, and we're going to continue this conversation. Our conversation will be being a person of faith in a secular healing space. We're going to have solid insights and practical tools for caring well without compromising your own faith when clients want a secular healing path. You're going to hear real stories. You're going to explore some language that helps to build trust, and you're going to walk away with some actual strategies that honor your calling and your client's needs. Thank you so very much for your time today. Monica, you have been such a breath of fresh air for us today. Whenever she and I get together for a phone call, I know I'm going to enter into a great conversation that I will be thinking about for a long time. And I hope that that was your experience today. I hope that this colored in something for you that has made you wonder, what if? What if I do something a little bit differently and meet people who think differently than I do, where they're at in their pain, so that they can also feel that freedom that comes with healing. We look forward to seeing you next time, and thank you so much. Bye.